of Orthodox spirituality.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy.
A wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.
Hello, dear listeners. We are continuing to read from the book With Pain and Love for Contemporary Man, the first volume in the series Spiritual Counsels by Saint Paisios. Chapter 2, Rationalism in Our Times. Logic in the Spiritual Life. Yeroda, what is the place of reason and logic in the spiritual life? Which logic are you talking about? If you mean secular logic, then yes, this kind of logic has no place at all in the spiritual life. When the elder refers to logic and reproaches it, he does not mean by this term the gift of reason with which God has honored human beings. What he means is rationalism, or as he calls it, afflicted reason, the logic that is void of faith in God, rejects divine providence, and denies the possibility of miracles. Angels and saints enter through our windows. We can see them, talk with them, and then they leave. There is no way that one can explain this logically. Today, with the increase in all kinds of knowledge, our trust only in logic has unfortunately shaken our faith to its foundations and filled our souls with question marks and doubts. This is why we are deprived of miracles, because a miracle cannot be explained logically. It can only be experienced. In contrast, faith in God can bring divine power down from heaven and overturn all human conclusions. It can perform miracles, resurrect the dead, and astonish science. From the outside, all things pertaining to the spiritual life seem upside down. If we don't abandon our own secular frame of mind in favor of a spiritual one, it will be impossible to become acquainted with the mysteries of God that appear so strange or upside down to us now. Those who believe that they can come to know the mysteries of God through mere scientific theory resemble a fool who thinks he can look through a telescope and see paradise. Logic is very harmful when we use it to scrutinize the divine, the mysteries, and miracles. Logic drove the Roman Catholics, as I have heard, to put the Holy Communion through chemical tests to determine if it is the actual body and blood of Christ. But the saints had so much faith that they often saw flesh and blood on the Holy Communion spoon. Pretty soon, they will be putting the saints through an X-ray machine to establish their sainthood. What the Catholics have done is to get rid of the Holy Spirit and put logic in his place. And now they spend their time with white magic. The practice of this magic produces favorable results which appear both miraculous and mysterious, but are actually caused by natural causes. A Catholic man with a good disposition came to see me. He was in tears. I said to him, "Among the most important differences that we have with you is that you put the mind first, whereas we put faith first. You have developed rationalism, and in general, you stress the human factor. With your rationalism, you limit the power of God, because you put divine grace aside. You put a preservative in holy water, ayasmos, to keep it from spoiling. We, on the other hand, pour holy water on spoiled things, and they become fresh again. We believe in the grace that sanctifies, and for this reason holy water remains unspoiled for 200 years, 500 years. It never spoils. In other words, Yeroda, logic and rationalism have taken precedence over God, right? Why don't we rather say that it is pride that has taken precedence? In this sense, logic or rationalism is essentially faulty reasoning. There is nothing sound about it. Pride is impaired reason. Logic full of egoism is logic that harbors demons. When this sort of logic is involved in our actions, we grant rights to the devil to intervene. Yeroda, is logic of any help when a spiritual person is confronting temptation? In such cases, we should do what is humanly possible, and where something is not in our power, we should leave it to God. There are some people who rely on their minds in everything they do, like those who want to pray the Jesus prayer only with their minds. They try so hard to concentrate that they get a headache. If I were to approach the problems that I face daily in this way, do you think that I would be able to manage? I just do what is humanly possible and leave the rest to God. I say to myself, God will show me, He will enlighten me, and I will know what to do. You hear many people complain, how will I get this done, and how will I manage to finish this or that? The smallest problem gives them a headache. If we try to solve problems using nothing but our logic, we will get dizzy. We must place God at the forefront of every one of our actions. We should do nothing without first putting our trust in God. Otherwise, we will agonize and tire our minds, and we will feel psychologically miserable. Yeroda, you have said that you never get stressed. How is that possible? Yes, this is true, and it happens because I do not handle problems with my mind. If I get a headache, it is because of a cold or low blood pressure. And I have to deal with so many things. Every day people come to me with their problems and their pain. I also think of those who have already come to see me, people with all kinds of troubles, the sick, and so on. And if someone should get well, they don't let me know so that I could rejoice a little. I go on worrying about them. Yeroda, what's the proper way for a monk or nun to deal with reasoning so that they will not be overwhelmed by logic? They should reason using spiritual rather than secular logic. It is good to turn the dial to the spiritual frequency and approach everything spiritually. It is important to think spiritually. Even lay persons who lead spiritual lives should not rely on secular logic. Such logic is the logic for good people who have no faith. Yeroda, what do you mean by approaching everything spiritually? A spiritual approach is when you enjoy the opposite of what secular people enjoy. It is, for example, when you are pleased by the fact that people are not paying any attention to you. If we want to enter the spiritual life, we must move in the opposite direction from the one that people in the world would expect us to move. Is it money you want? You should give it all away, including your wallet. Is it a throne you desire? Be prepared to sit humbly on a stool. How about us, Yeroda? How do we fare when it comes to logic? You need to be unscrewed. I pray that it will be love that will unscrew your minds, the divine madness of love. If it were any different, then those who go to psychiatric hospitals should be considered better than those Christians who have the madness of rationalism, that is, the logic of pride. Secular logic makes us suffer. Yeroda, my heart feels hard like a stone. How do we treat hardness of heart? Sclerocardia. Your problem is not a hard heart, but a mind-driven heart. Your entire heart has been taken over by your mind, and now only your mind works. But there is still a chance for your heart to be set free. How? Each day you must read a canon from the Theologian. The Theologian is a collection of 62 hymnological canons consisting of a series of odes to the Theotokos. In 1796, St. Nicodemus the Iorite published the Theologian after he diligently collected these canons from Holy Mountain manuscripts. This is the best medicine to get your heart working again. You do have a heart, but it has been covered by logic. You are following the European rubrics, the European way of thinking. You want to be true to form and do everything right. If you were a European clerk, you would be exemplary, always on time, impeccable in your duties, an example to follow. If you were to apply this integrity to spiritual matters, you would certainly make great spiritual strides and reach paradise soon. But you see, the European spirit, with its logic, is not heading to God, but to the moon. Now you are behaving like a civil servant. But this is not the way of the spiritual life. What is needed is simplicity. Act with simplicity and put your trust in God. How can I acquire this simplicity, Yaroda? I will open your head and put an old-fashioned mind in it. You need to enter the simple world of the Gerondikon and get to know the spiritual science which lifts and refreshes the soul. Then all your headaches will go away. Logic can make us suffer. For example, if I say to myself, this must be done in this specific manner, and so I go ahead and do it because it has to be done. I don't do it with my heart, but because logic dictates it. Logic and courtesy may tell me, I must give up my seat, but my heart says otherwise. Think how different things become when it is my heart that is moved, rather than my logic, and I give up my seat out of love. I feel such joy. We should keep the self out of our actions. We should not act for the sake of our own comfort. If we do, Christ cannot come close to us. We should always try to comfort the other person. True rest can only be found by comforting others. Then God rests in us, and we are not human anymore. We are deified. Otherwise, we do everything with our minds, and we remain carnal and human. Secular logic tires the mind and weakens the body. It constricts the heart, while spiritual logic expands it. When used correctly, the intellect can spur the heart and help it. When the nous enters the heart, and the two of them work together, our work is not any more the work of logic or reason. Sound reasoning is a gift, but this gift must first be sanctified. Yaronda, I don't have a heart. Of course you have a heart, but as soon as it tries to act, your mind puts a muzzle on it. You must try to acquire the logic of the heart, the logic of faith and love. How can I achieve this? Here's the first step. You will go to Thessaloniki and march in protest, barefooted, so people will say you have gone mad. All so that you will lose your mind. Blessed soul, you approach everything with mathematical exactness. What are you, an astronomer? If you stop basing everything on rationalism, you will be able to start working spiritually on yourself. What should I study, Yeroda, to help me get rid of worldly logic? First, you must read the Gerondikon, Philotheos History, Ascetic Life by Theodoretus of Cyrus. He presents the life and deeds of 30 ascetics who lived around Antiochia, Syria, in the 5th century. And Everietinos, well-known anthology of ascetic patristic sayings and incidents, which was compiled by the monk Paul the Everietinos, the founder of the famous monastery of the Theotokos Everietithos in Constantinople. These books are practical, not theoretical. Their simple patristic spirit and holiness will help you remove the secular logic from your mind. Then you will begin to read Abba Isaac. You will not see him as a philosopher, but as a man illumined by God. The soul's inner sense is corrupted by secular logic. The Holy Father saw everything with the spiritual, the divine eye. Patristic texts were written in the Spirit of God, and it was in that Spirit that the Holy Fathers gave their interpretations. Today, because this Spirit is rare, patristic texts are hard to understand. People see everything with the secular eye and cannot see beyond. They do not have the breadth of spirit that results from faith and love. St. Arsenios the Great used to leave palm leaves for days in the same water, and the stench was very bad. It is so hard for us to understand what benefit he received from that dirty water. St. Arsenios the Great only changed the water for his palm leaves once a year. The rest of the time he simply added to it. Some monks implored him in these words, "Why do you not change the water for these palm leaves when it smells bad?" He said to them, "Instead of the aromatic perfumes I once enjoyed in the world, I must now endure this unpleasant smell." "But I don't understand that," we hear some people say. They do not take the time to see if something else is involved. They simply reject it because it makes no sense to them. When logic takes over, we have a hard time understanding the Gospel and the Holy Fathers. Our spiritual sense is so altered that we use logic in order to prove that the Gospel and the works of the Holy Fathers are useless. We say things like, "We have suffered in vain all these years with fasting and asceticism." This is blasphemy. One time a young monk who lived in a keli drove to my kalivi in a car. "My son," said I, "why do you need this car? It is not right for a monk." "But Yeroda," he answered, "doesn't the Gospel say, 'You will receive 100-fold and inherit eternal life'?" Matthew 19, verse 29. I replied, "When the Gospel says you will receive 100-fold, it refers to the things that a person needs. But more fitting for a monk is what the Apostle Paul says when he speaks of Christians as having nothing and yet possessing everything. 2 Corinthians 6, verse 10. In other words, since a monk has no possessions, others see his virtue and entrust him with their finances. We monks should not own anything. Do you see how logic can lead one to the wrong interpretation? You must always remember that if we are not first purified, if divine enlightenment does not come to us, any interpretation we might give will always be muddled. Once I was asked, why didn't the Panagia perform a miracle on the island of Tinos to prevent the Italians from blowing up the Greek frigate Elis on the day of her feast? It was the feast of the Dormition of the Theotokos. Actually, the Panagia performed a greater miracle on that day. The attack on the Elis, August 15, 1940, made the Greek people indignant. Having realized that the Italians would not respect anything, they went after them and kicked them out, shouting, "Aera." On October 28, 1940, Italy invaded Greece. Aera was the battle cry of the Greek soldiers during the war between Greece and Italy. It means literally air and metaphorically get blown away. Had the attack on Tinos not taken place, the Greeks might have thought, the Italians are religious people like us. They are our friends. They would not have realized the measure of their disrespect. So what am I supposed to say to people who put logic first and ask me questions like, why didn't Panagia perform a miracle? Still, others ask, how do they know that the fire in Babylon was actually 49 cubits high when they threw in the 3 young men? Did they actually have it measured? Since the fire was 7 cubits high at first, and they added more fuel to increase it to 7-fold, doesn't 7 times 7 make 49? Don't you feel like throwing such people into the fire? You can see that this kind of rationalism, this secular illogic, is completely out of touch with reality. Even some modern theologians spend their time asking similar questions. For example, they may ask, did the demons that fell into the sea survive or drown? Compare Matthew 8, verse 32. What matters is that they had come out of the man. Why are you so concerned with what happened to them? Make sure that you don't get possessed yourself and don't be concerned about where the demons are now. Geroda, some people are trying to reconcile the gospel with human, secular logic. They try to explain it rationally and cannot make any sense out of it. It is not possible to put the gospel and secular logic together. In the gospel there is love, while in secular logic there is self-interest. The gospel says, "And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2." Matthew 5 verse 41. What is logical about this saying? This is surely madness. This is why those who try to reconcile the gospel with secular logic find themselves in utter confusion. To give you an example, there are many charitable groups engaging in works of charity. They learn that someone has suffered a great loss, a bankruptcy, and needs money. Let's help him, they say. But first we must be sure that he is really in need. So 2 or 3 of them decide to visit his house to see if he is really in need. And let's say that they see, for example, that he has a luxurious dining set, and they conclude, "Oh, these armchairs and dining set are so nice. If he has such expensive furniture, he cannot be in need." And they end up giving him nothing. What they don't understand is that this person may indeed be hungry. We should not expect to see a poor person in rags and with no possessions right away. How do you know that this dining set was not something he had from before and could not sell? Perhaps it was given to him by someone who heard about his family's plight. They judge everything with logic and get confused, and the gospel is kept out of their lives. People look at others from the outside rather than from the heart, and for this reason they see them in the wrong light. Judging by appearances. Compare John 7 verse 24. Geroda, I feel that my judgment, my logic, and my human sense of justice are obstacles to my spiritual progress. Of course they are obstacles to your spiritual progress because where they are present, God's grace is absent. Without grace, we are left without divine assistance and fall flat on our face. As a rule, judgment and human justice are unjust. God's justice is full of love, forbearance, and mercy. What causes your spiritual disease is your tendency to examine things with human logic. The best remedy is good thoughts. When our thinking is on the right side, that is, our thoughts are good, the capacity of the heart increases. Since you tend to use logic too much, you must be very careful with your thoughts, because the conclusions you reach based on logic are human rather than spiritual and holy. Geroda, why do I criticize others so much? In your case, it is your legal education that should be blamed. Studies in a particular field or practice in certain professions will often cultivate in us a dry logic. Logic is the disease of intellectuals. It is in their bone marrow. Even though you have a heart, you still put logic first. There are some people who have a great capacity for logic and for passing judgment on others out of egoism. They are self-centered and dismiss the views of everybody else. They expect absolute correctness from others, but not from themselves. They are comfortable with their own weaknesses and shortcomings and eager to blame others. This is all very strange. These people are well-formed, externally, that is. In other words, they have created an exterior self, full of hypocrisy, without even a trace of simplicity in them. This is the difference between Europeans and Greeks. And by Greeks, I mean the Orthodox spirit. You can never figure out the right way to approach a European, because no matter what, he will always welcome you with a fake smile. But with a Greek, it is different. You always know how he feels. Is he happy? He shows it. Is he upset? He shows it. You can tell right away how to deal with him. Geroda, what is wrong with rushing to pass judgment on people, things, and situations? We rush to judgment when we act based on logic. Only our brain is working, and this is the result. It would be good for those who have great minds if God took a screwdriver and turn the screws of these good minds a bit. The less logic works, the more grace comes and fills our minds. When I say mind, I mean human judgment, egoism, and self-confidence. From the moment we acknowledge that we may not have the right judgment and say, I risk making mistakes because my judgment is simply logical and lacks divine enlightenment, I should not use it anymore. God will enlighten us. We will be able to discriminate and truly discern right from wrong. The devil makes bright people useless when they judge according to appearance. Compare John 7, verse 24. When we have only the human element in our nature, we judge based only on human standards and have therefore committed a crime. Only when this human element disappears will our judgment become divine. A judgment based only on secular criteria is a wrong judgment. There is so much injustice in this world. People are tempted and scandalized all the time. This is why, if you want to ensure a good state for your soul, your thoughts must always be good. Human beings are a mystery. It is so difficult to know the inner self of the other person, to know what is on his mind. Once, on the day of Pascha, after the Divine Liturgy, we stopped for a while at a kalivi to eat cheese and eggs. Next to me was seated a monk, whose job was to transport wood. He would not eat what was offered to him, but was putting it aside. Eat, I said to him. All right, I will, he replied. But I saw that he was not eating anything. Eat, I said again. Today is Pascha. Bless me, Father, he replied. But when I receive Holy Communion, I do not eat. At 2 o'clock, I will eat. He had not eaten since the day before, and he would not eat again until the afternoon. Do you see what he did out of piety and devotion? And the others may have thought that he was only a simple transporter of wood. Man is a mystery. Every time, then, that you are asked to pass judgment on something or someone, you must stop and think, is this judgment a divine judgment, or is it filled with passion? That is to say, is our judgment disinterested, or is it self-serving? You should not trust yourselves or your judgment. When we judge others, we are full of egoism. I am often asked to assess a situation and give my opinion, and I end up doing it out of obligation, against my will. I may be giving a selfless and impartial opinion, but when later I go to pray, the sweetness that I usually feel is not present. This is not because my conscience bothers me over something. It is rather because I have passed judgment on human terms. Now imagine how one would feel if the judgment was wrong, or if it was filled with justifications or based on human standards. Judgment is a very serious matter. The right to judge is God's alone. How awesome is His judgment! Those who are in a position to judge others may have good intentions, but that is not what matters. The important thing is the outcome of their judgment, how it affects people. It is important to have discernment at all times. Naturally, all of us have the ability to discern to a greater or lesser degree. But unfortunately, most of us do not use it on ourselves, but only on others, so that they will not appear to be better than we are. Thus, we infect our discernment with judgment and criticism, and with the demand that others correct themselves, when we should direct these demands to ourselves only. We are the ones who are not truly determined to take the spiritual struggle seriously. It is we who fail to put an end to the rule of our passions and set our souls free to fly to heaven. Dear listeners, thank you for listening. Our show has come to an end. We will continue once again where we left off in our next show. Until then, be well.
Do thou also now, from all passions and perils deliver us. Lord, have mercy, Lord, have mercy, Lord, have
Readings of Orthodox Spirituality.
Lord, have mercy, Lord, have
wondrous journey into Orthodoxy.
Lord, have mercy.
Prepared and presented by Angeliki Antonakou, Lekea.
Lord, have mercy.